Chapter 9. Wild Boy woke in the dark. He heard heavy, rumbling breaths. Confused, he reached out a shaky hand, feeling wooden planks beneath him and then the cold metal shaft in front. He tried to focus, but his head whirled with dizziness. He tasted blood in his mouth, panic rising in his throat. Where was he? Yards away, something growled. He heard the soft padding of paws. He slid forward, but iron bars blocked his escape. He slid back, but there were bars all around. To his horror, he realised he was in a cage. A shaft of light broke the dark. Wild Boy flinched away as the light grew into the roaring flame of a torch. A ghastly face glared at him from the gloom, charcoal-lined eyes and crusty white makeup. Mary Everett limped closer on her crutch, holding the crackling torch in her other hand. "What's happening?" Wild Boy demanded. "Let me out!" A smudge of charcoal ran like a black tear down the ringmaster's powdered cheek. "Thought you'd feel at home with the animals, freak." She swept her torch through the dark. Its arc of flame lit a row of cages raised on wooden carts around the side of the big top. These were the homes of the circus's wild beasts. A family of cowering chimpanzees, a pair of grinning hyenas, and a Bengal tiger curled against the bars, its amber eyes glinting in the torchlight. Around the Wild Boy's cage, more and more torches crackled to life. A dozen circus porters stepped from the dark. He could smell the booze on their breath and see it in their bleary eyes. He shuffled forward and clutched the bars. "Listen to me," he said. "There's been a murder. Professor Wollstonecraft." "He admits it," said one of the porters. "No, it weren't me." "Then who was it?" Mary Everett asked. I never saw his face. He wore a mask." A ripple of laughter spread through the porters. The hyenas joined in, drool trickling from their shiny fangs. "Enough," said Mary Everett, and everyone shut up, even the hyenas. "You were seen running from the professor's van," she said. "But so was someone else. Who's your partner?" "I ain't got no partner, I swear. It was the hooded man. Listen to me. He walks funny, and he—" The ringmaster jabbed her torch at the bars, causing a burst of sparks. Wild Boy cried out and tumbled back as the fire singed the hair on his hands and face. Mary Everett used her torch to light a cigar. She took a long drag and blew smoke through the bars. "No, you listen to me, freak. You were seen running from the professor's van, and you got blood on your hands." Wild Boy had never been so scared. He thought of Clarissa. She knew about the letter. She could tell them why he was in the professor's van. But he feared her mother was crazy enough to put her on trial too. Clarissa was no friend of his, but he wouldn't snitch on her. Besides, these people didn't care what he said. They just wanted to punish a freak. He had to stay tough. Look for any chance to escape. "It ain't true," he said. "You got no evidence." A grin cracked across Mary Everett's powdered face. It was as if she'd been waiting for him to say that. "Show him," she said. Two of the porters came forward. They took hold of the cart that held the cage and began to push it over the mud. The rest of the crew marched behind, flags of flame fluttering through the night. Wild Boy slammed his shoulder against the side of the cage, swearing and spitting at the circus crew. "Let me out," he yelled. "I ain't done nothing." But again the porters just laughed. "Ha ha, the monkey's hungry. Throw him a nut." They steered the cart into a long stable hut. Horses whined behind the stall doors and whips dangled from wooden rafters. One of the porters closed the door and stood guard. The others crowded around Wild Boy's cage, drunken, leering faces. Too scared to fight, Wild Boy curled up in the centre of the cage and pulled his knees to his chest. "Enough," Mary Everett called. The group of men parted as she came forward. "Let the freak see," she said. The boy rose, brushing hairs from his eyes. What he saw made him gasp. "Professor Wollstonecraft," he said. The old scientist's body lay in a heap against the stable wall. His arms were flopped by his sides and his mouth gaped open in a silent scream. A crow pecked at his rigid fingers, and Wild Boy noticed that his golden ring was missing. Mary Everett kicked the crow away. "You say we ain't got no evidence," she said. "Well, how about this?" With the end of her crutch, she flicked away some straw beside the body. Written in the mud were 2 words. Wild Boy. A gust of wind sent an eerie howl through the stable. Wild Boy tried to whisper, "It wasn't me," but the words got stuck with the fear in his throat. Now Mary Everett used her crutch to turn one of the professor's hands. There, on the middle finger, was a streak of mud, but there was something else too. Gripped in the corpse's stiff fingers was a clump of long brown hair. The ringmaster looked at Wildboy. That yours? A trapdoor opened in Wildboy's stomach, plunging panic. No, he said. No, I didn't do it. The hooded man set me up. A liar, one of the porters said. Shut your head, Wildboy yelled. This is murder. The killer dumped the professor's body here and set me up. Ain't it obvious? How's that then? Look, Wildboy said. See the mud on his finger? It's on his middle finger. So? He wouldn't write with that finger. He'd use this one. And what about that hair? Look at it. It's horse hair, not mine. And what about them horses too? And all their noise tonight? The horses didn't make any noise tonight, one of the porters said. But they would have, if there was a murder down here, wouldn't they? Before Wildboy knew it, his big eyes were scouring the ground for more clues. Among all the footprints, he spotted strange, round impressions in the mud. They looked like marks from a walking cane, only wider and deeper. There, he said. See them marks? They go right up to the body. And look how deep they are. It was someone leaning on a cane or a stick. Remember, I told you the killer walked funny, and look, the professor's ring is gone. He was wearing a ring when I last saw him. A gold ring with the letter G. The killer must have pinched it, but I ain't got it, do I? Search me, go on. A few of the porters peered at the professor's hand curiously, but Mary Everett waved them back with her crutch. The ringmaster puffed her cigar. I know a few things too, freak. Know about everyone on this travelling fair. I know you stole that coat from my band, for instance. I know you hide up in the vans, spying on folk, and I'm told you can see things no one else can. The porters chuckled with their boss. Mary Everett blew another cloud of smoke through the bars. He was a clever man, the professor, she continued. A learned man. That's why you hated him, ain't it? Because you're just a freak and can't never be anything else. No, you're wrong. We heard you were seen attacking someone last night with a knife. What? No. He attacked us. He had the knife. Us. So you do have a partner. Which of the freaks is it? Tell me and maybe I'll change your sentence. Sentence? I ain't done nothing. You ran from the professor's van. You're covered in his blood. No, he wrote your name. It ain't true. You're the only monster here. I ain't no killer. Wildboy's cry rang around the stable. He stared at the professor's body through teary eyes. He knew he could find more clues to prove his innocence, but what was the point? The hatred in Mary Everett's eyes was clear, and those porters wouldn't help him. They relied on her for their jobs. But he wasn't going to give up either. He reached between the cage bars to the cart's wooden floor, dug out a loose nail, and gripped its end with trembling fingers. If any of these men opened the cage, he would stab them with it and try to get past. He'd spotted a hole in the stable wall that looked big enough to squeeze through. Mary Everett turned to the porters. One of our own has been killed, she said. We don't need no coppers round here. We take care of our own business. Punish them with what needs punishing. That's showman's law. That way everything stays right. She looked at Wildboy, and for a moment her eyes softened. He thought he saw something like sadness under that white powder. It was almost as if she didn't want to do this, didn't want to be the person she was being. But a second later that person was back, and the ringmaster's eyes hardened. This is murder, she said. Only one sentence for that. Jack, get the rope. Sam and Isaac, grab the freak. One of the porters threw a rope around the rafter and tied the end in a noose. The others circled the cage, fire torches blazing. Wildboy gripped the nail, but his hands shook so hard that it slipped from his fingers. He scrambled back, feeling for the weapon. Get away, he warned. Get away, or you'll all be sorry. The porters stepped closer, and then, whoosh, a rush of wind extinguished their torches. The stable fell into darkness. Who opened the doors? Mary Everett roared. Joe, I said no one else comes in. I am sorry, a voice replied from the dark. It seems that Joe was remiss in his duties. A lantern flickered to life and bobbed closer. Wildboy's heart surged. Had someone come to rescue him? All he could see over the porters' heads was the gleaming crown of a top hat. He dropped low and glimpsed polished black shoes and the silver tip of a cane prodding the ground. Beyond them, the porter that had guarded the stable door lay unconscious over a bale of straw. Who are you? Mary Everett demanded. Finally, Wildboy saw the figure, a tall, immaculately dressed man who leaned on his cane in a way that suggested the stick was more than an accessory to his finely cut coat. As he came closer, a flash of gold shone from under the shadow of his top hat. Slowly, calmly, the man removed the hat. The lantern light caught his face, and Wildboy glimpsed a streak of silver and another gleam of gold. The silver was the man's hair, slicked back and perfectly parted at the side, but the gold? It was the man's eye. He had a golden eyeball. The metal globe bulged in his thin, angular face as he looked down at the corpse of Professor Wollstonecraft. Wildboy noticed a ring glint on the man's finger. It was just like the one the professor had once worn, inscribed with the letter G. The man spoke. His voice was calm and measured. "Gentlemen, you will all leave this place." Mary Everett scoffed. "You all stay right where you are," she ordered. Wildboy saw her hand shake, just a little, as she lit another cigar. Very few people made Mary Everett nervous. "You're a copper," the ringmaster said. "You ain't wanted here. Ain't that so, fellas? Coppers don't know anything about our world." Wildboy could barely believe what had happened next. The golden-eyed man laughed, a great booming roar that filled the stable. Still without as much as a glance at Mary Everett, he turned and addressed one of the porters. "You," he said, his voice now deadly serious, "your name is Richard Carson. You are currently on parole from Newgate, where you served 3 years for burglary." He turned to the rest of the crew and addressed them in turn. "You are Isaac Solomon, a deserter from the French Foreign Legion. Theodore Lent, you are a part-time fence. Samuel Swales, leader of a notorious gang of grave robbers. And who could forget Mr. Silas Cullen, escaped convict from the prison ship Defiance?" The men were speechless. The golden-eyed man turned to the ringmaster and plucked the cigar from her mouth. "And you, Mrs. Mary Louise Everett, are the holder of a circus licence that would certainly be revoked were someone to report your employees as various indiscretions." He shoved the cigar back into her mouth. "Now, I wish to speak with the boy." Wildboy was just as stunned as the porters. These were rough fairgrounders, but this man spoke to them like they were children. Several of the men rushed from the stable. The others hesitated, glancing anxiously at Mary Everett. After a long moment, the ringmaster nodded. "You got 5 minutes," she said, as she led the remaining porters outside. The golden-eyed man closed the stable door behind them and slid the bolt. The moment the door sealed, he slammed a hand against the wooden wall. He gripped his cane and grimaced, fighting some terrible agony in his head. Wildboy watched, astonished, as the man reached to his false eye and plucked it from his face. He gave the golden globe a shake, and then tipped some sort of liquid from inside onto his coat sleeve. He pressed the sleeve to his nose and inhaled deeply. His one good eye rolled upwards. The other eye's empty socket glistened in the light from his lantern as he turned and finally looked at Wildboy. "At last," he said, "we are alone." Intriguing. Come back again tomorrow for the next 2 chapters. Bye.